I see a lot of people discussing about how Agile failed. And it was the great hope to make productivity better, faster, more resilient, and it failed.
Yes, I would agree that you could look at it as it failed. But if you actually step back a minute, what you really see is that the people failed Agile. Agile had one of the hardest jobs in the entire IT industry, is you're asking people to change.
Is Agile dead? No, it isn't. But are people actually practicing it? Probably not.
Hi, I'm Michael Forrester. Welcome to the Performant Professional. I'm here with
Chris McNabb
and Louis Puster.
And we're here today to talk about, in episode 1095, we don't even know. It's probably episode 5 at this point. If Agile is dead and Waterfall, I'm going to use the professional vernacular here, sucks, well, what methods are actually good when it comes to basically software development, software delivery, and the alignment of all the people, the processes, and all the other stuff around that whole thing? So, Agile is dead. Is that true? That Agile is dead? Or is Agile dead? Is it dead?
I don't know. I keep seeing a lot of memes on the internet about how Agile sucks and it never worked and it was never.
That must be true then.
I mean, but because the people who are talking about it are developers, right? And
wait, can we frame this up?
Yeah.
As far as I know, you are the only professional trained Agilist in this conversation.
Yes.
Is that correct?
I don't know. Am I?
I'm not.
Okay, then yeah.
Yeah. You're the only professional trained Agilist.
Yeah.
So we have only worked in Agile frameworks.
Yep.
But you have actually run Agile frameworks.
Yes. Yeah.
But we've all worked in Waterfall.
Yeah.
Although I don't know does anyone get trained in Waterfall?
No, it just happens to you.
Okay, so I just want to frame that up. Please continue, Louis. Is Agile dead?
But I see a lot of people discussing about how Agile failed. And it was the great hope to make productivity better, faster, more resilient, and it failed. And I asked myself this question. Well, I mean, Waterfall, right? We saw that as a failure because we kept having to push deadlines. People didn't get what they wanted. Things weren't lining up. There were lots of problems. The feedback loop wasn't fast enough.
Right.
So Agile was the answer, right? And this is not just Scrum. This is not just Kanban. This is not just scaling methodologies. It's really just working in a more flexible way with a faster feedback loop to iteratively deliver work to your customer.
Yes.
That was the idea.
Yep.
And people are saying that failed. And so
yes. I would agree that you could look at it as it failed.
Yeah.
But if you actually step back a minute, what you really see is that the people failed Agile.
That's true.
Well, can I also just say that framing something that was meant to be a continuous evolution, continuous engagement, continuous integration, promotion, all the stuff, to label something that had kind of an infinite game aspect to it has failed.
Yeah,
I think in and of itself is a broken perspective. That's like saying
absolutely.
We're not living anymore.
Right. Or it's like saying, I took this hammer and I smacked it at that nail and the nail didn't go in because I glanced off of it.
Well, and
the hammer failed.
Maybe even 1,000 times. Okay. Right. But I want to emphasize this, though, is that I don't think anybody here in this conversation thinks that Agile, in any of its, especially in any of its fixed implementations, is a panacea.
No.
Okay, so I want to throw this out there because I think ultimately Agile had one of the hardest jobs in the entire IT industry, which we get a taste of in DevOps, and I think you get a lot of it in Agile, is you're asking people to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that all of the transformations that I have worked on, you could say that almost every Agile transformation has failed in its own individual way because it failed to deliver the expectations of the people who asked for the transformation. And in part, that happens because the people who are asking for the transformation don't know what they're asking for. They think that it's a panacea that will instantly transform their organization, and it won't require them to change at all. And so in that sense,
my God.
In that sense, every transformation that I've ever worked on has failed.
But okay, hold on, Louis, hold on. All right. So you're saying that and I think we've experienced this, but you've done this more, is that you're walking into places, they're saying, I want things to change. I'm going to say this speculatively. The leaders are saying they want things to change.
Yep.
But they're the ones who have created the current situation in a lot of cases, not necessarily in solo, but in strong probability. They are the primary driver for that culture, possibly how the people behave, subsequently how the processes are derived, and subsequently how the technology is implemented.
Yeah.
And you're saying that those people don't want to change.
Correct.
Well, then how does change even happen in an organization?
It's a great question. Agile movement really started at the team level because the leaders wouldn't make any changes.
Ooh.
So the teams started developing their own ways of working, which gave birth to XP and Scrum and stole the Kanban methodology from Toyota and all these different things, right? It's kind of made that merge into the marketplace. But it was happening just on the team level. So teams were operating in this way, but they had an agreement together. They were willing to experiment to find their way. And then those teams started to perform. And so then businesses wanted to adopt this performance that was there. And that's how we landed where we have these scaled ways of these working. How do you get two different teams to work together in this method?
Yeah.
But the problem ultimately is that if you're trying to deliver higher quality in small iterations, get solid feedback loop where no one is the person who's causing the trouble, but instead they realize that there are problems and then the problems are solved together. The business accepts or mitigates risk that's within their designs and what they're shooting for.
Right.
This is a collaborative experience. The reason why it worked on the team level is because everyone opted in for the experiment.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
And when you're trying to transform the entire organization, there are people at multiple levels who will opt out.
Wait, say more about opting out. What do you mean by opting out?
I would say there are some that opt out, and there are some that are like they opt into fighting it.
Yeah.
Resistance.
Resistance.
Active resistance.
Active
So
resistance.
we're not just checking out.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
We're checking in the opposite way.
Yep.
Yeah. When I say opt out, I mean that too.
Right, I know.
Right.
That people who are actively resisting the change. And
But wait, what's the benefit of actively resisting the change?
they think it's not needed. They don't want their job to change. They're afraid of what's going to happen to their job. If there's change, will they be needed anymore? There's a myriad of reasons why someone doesn't want something to change because they are afraid of it. Usually,
Yeah, usually they're.
or they're
Or it's hard.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's even just the loss of control. Like when you take a development team and you say you are not going to determine what each person is working on every day, but instead the team is going to ingest your requests based on a priority list. They're going to decide how they solve the problem. They're going to deliver value to you, and then you're going to give them feedback on whether or not they hit the mark or missed it. Right? That's a drastic change to the way that a lot of managers have operated teams in the
From
past.
the command and control piece.
Yeah. So that loss of control means that a lot of managers are like, what are these people even doing? How do I validate whether or not they're good employees?
Right.
I have no idea how to do
But
that.
there are outputs that go with these outcomes.
Yeah.
They're
Right.
Like if we were to track, for example, development velocity or alignment of features to customer satisfaction.
Velocity is a planning tool. It is not a metric for
Oh,
performance.
good to know.
Velocity is just simply a way for the team to plan what's going on with their productivity and how to manage how much they can accept during a given time frame. It is not a metric to measure your employees by whether or not they're producing value or not. The way that you determine if a team is providing value or not is if they are making commitments and meeting those commitments, right? And if the value that they're outputting helps the organization by either helping internal customers or external customers or both.
Revenue or reputation, right?
Yep.
Things we talked about.
Yep.
But that's a lot harder to measure than
It is.
did this person do what I say?
But
It is
hold on.
much more.
Reputation, though, I think, because the reputation, let's call it also feedback, right?
Sure.
I think there are like mechanisms for that, but people don't commonly implement.
Right. But I mean, it doesn't matter what mechanisms there are. It's never going to be as easy to measure as did you do what I told you to?
The checkbox.
Yeah.
Yep.
Got
Have this on my desk by 5 p.m.
Right.
You're fired. Like that sort of mentality goes away
Yeah.
in this environment, right? And I think that the cultural shift for a lot of organizations is really hard. And even with this more flexible, try to deliver iterations and blah, 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 we still see organizations that are pushing their teams to work 60 to 80 hour weeks to deliver what they promised to deliver, which is actually not what they promised to deliver, but instead what they were told to deliver within a given sprint or a given month or a quarter or what have you. And so now we have the same problem again. It's command and control with a veneer of being agile, but there's no actual agility happening.
Okay, so two things to that then, right? Is that so what we're saying is that Agile still has a place because at the end of the day, it's really just about aligning output with value, right? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, but I think it's the same thing as the difference between Agile and Waterfall in my mind is that you go into Agile not always knowing 100% what you're going to produce. You understand the goals and the values you're going to deliver, but you don't know exactly how you're going to get there. And you figure it out as you go, and you do it in iterative chunks, which allows for you to get feedback as you go.
So
Waterfall, yes. Waterfall is not that. Waterfall is, here's a 300-page document. I expect at the end of 6 months that you're going to deliver this to me exactly as I've written it to you now. And I don't care if the market has changed. I don't care if people have gotten sick. I don't care if our customers no longer want these features. In 6 months, you're going to deliver this to me.
No matter what.
No matter what. That's what Waterfall is, right?
But people weren't happy with that because that wasn't working.
It wasn't working.
Right.
It wasn't working. There was a delay on getting things to market. The market would shift during the time of development. There was no feedback loop from the customer in order to make sure that the value that they'd planned was the value that they actually needed.
Right.
Like, all of these problems were real issues for software. When you're building something like a stadium, like we've used this example before, when you're building a stadium, you know kind of what you're shooting for, and a big plan is required, right? Especially since there's code requirement, like that with the state or what have you that you have to put in place. But with software, everything can be flexible unless you're tied to a post somehow,
right,
which are usually non-functional requirements, right? Like these things are things you have to have,
right,
and everyone navigates around them. But you're trying to deliver value, and at the end of the 6 month period with Waterfall, you get, here's what your product is. With software, that never stops. With software as we live in the current marketplace, even software that runs a hardware device, like these cameras, the mic, the computer that we're recording this on, all of these things are receiving constant updates all the time to navigate the shifting marketplace of software across the entire marketplace, right?
Yeah.
From security concerns to other things it has to interact with, to API updates. All of these things are happening constantly.
Yeah.
You cannot do that in 6 month chunk. You have to do it in a shorter iteration.
Right. Agreed. The funny thing, though, is that we've been in places, just to say this, you and I recently have been in a place where someone said to us, they said, well, we don't know why you're having conversations with the transformation specialists when we could just tell you what the problems are, right? Because they were part of the organization. And what was interesting about that whole statement was that much like where we were trying to create a product that was aligned with customer feedback, we were having conversations with every member of that organization to align that transformation to the customer, who we actually thought in this case wasn't just the external customer, but was actually the members of the organization itself, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's fascinating because it's like, when we say Agile is dead and Waterfall didn't work, so we know that's not happening, it's 2025. So then what are people replacing? If they're not using an iterative, responsive feedback loop, and they're not using a declared stake in the ground to drive their, design, delivery, et cetera, then what are people doing? Like what?
They're honestly doing the worst of both worlds.
Well, that's what I hear, like Wagile and Agilefall, like those are the things we hear, right?
Yep. I mean, if you listen to the internet and the complaints that I constantly hear from developers, engineers, DevOps people, managers, product people,
oh my God, yes.
Everyone's complaining. And what they're doing is a bunch of busy work that they don't think is necessary.
So they don't think the rituals, the Scrum, the communication, all that. Okay, so what drives that? Because, like, as an example, let's pick on Scrum, for example.
Okay.
One of their common rituals is the daily stand-up.
Yep.
I've gotten more negative feedback about the need, why, and whatnot about the daily stand-up than almost any other thing associated even with Agile.
Okay, so let's talk about the recommendation versus the reality. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, Chris, right? As a person who's worked on development teams, right? The recommendation for a stand-up meeting is to make it as short as possible, no longer than 15 minutes.
Yep.
What has been your experience with stand-up meetings?
Oh, they're way longer than 15 minutes.
Okay.
And I can somewhat sum up the problem by repeating a phrase that I had to say way too many times at a previous company. Stand-up is not a status meeting. It is supposed to be a planning meeting to plan the day's work, to plan interaction between yourself and your team members, or identifying places where you need to interact with other teams. Like, that's what it's supposed to be about.
Or any long-term problems.
Yeah. Oh, and it's a place for people to ask for help.
Right. Yeah.
That help that shouldn't come during that meeting.
No.
And what happens?
It's, hey, I'm going to need some help with this later.
What happens is this ends up being conversation where people then fixate on a problem and they spend an hour trying to solve a problem or communicate about some needless thing that they shouldn't be focusing on, while wasting everyone else's time who's standing there politely waiting for the meeting to be over.
Right.
And generally, that's all people are doing, is they're just waiting for their time to give their update, and then waiting for the meeting to be over.
Yep. And what you said was accurate, but I would put a finer point on it, right? The whole team needs to understand what the goal of the sprint is, because the whole team should succeed or fail the sprint together.
Yes.
And I don't even like to talk about failing the sprint. It's just missing what you're trying to deliver, right?
Yeah.
But everyone needs to be in this to win it together.
Right.
They're a team, right?
Right.
So that meeting is literally just hey, how are we doing so far? Well, I closed 3 stories yesterday. I need somebody to QA them on the team so that way we can actually move them to closed. Cool, I can help you with that, says somebody else. That's what that meeting is. And then your burned out chart, you talk about what's supposed to be happening for that day, and then people go to work. You don't spend all that time in that meeting trapping everyone.
Well, what about going through the list of things that you're working on and, wanting to be like, hey, so where are you at with this? You said you were going to be done yesterday.
Yeah.
And then having to give a 10-minute explanation of why you're not done.
So honestly, I mean, if you have a Scrum Master or you don't have a Scrum Master, it doesn't matter, whoever's facilitating the meeting.
Right.
If there's an in-flight story, it should be a quick, hey, we had talked yesterday about this being done. Are you stuck? Do you need help?
Right.
And then figure out how it's going to impact the rest of the sprint to navigate around that possible change. It's not about a status update.
Right. And
it's about how are we doing so far and how do we move things around, people or stories, to make sure that we can meet our goals.
Yep. And I would argue that even that conversation should probably happen after the stand-up. It should be like, hey, yeah, I'm stuck. Okay, we'll talk about it.
Yeah, you parking lot it. You don't talk about the specifics.
Yep.
You parking lot it.
Yep.
You determine what takeaway actions everybody's supposed to have, and then you do that afterwards.
So this highlights something because, when people say that Agile is dead, and let's translate that it's not working, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's an interesting thing around we know Agile, or we have a prescribed ritual, or we have a thing that we do.
Yep.
But I don't know, correct me if it's wrong, is that the intention was to follow some kind of fixed behavior without understanding the outcome and the why behind that behavior. And I say that, Louis, and I want you to answer this specifically, is that how often have we been in front of somebody and they're like, I know Agile. What do you do? I went to a training. Cool. And what are you doing in that training? It's like, well, we're following the rituals that were given to us.
Yeah.
Do you understand why you were given those rituals? No. What about your Agile coach? Well, we fired.
Yeah.
We kept him for 6 months. We got set up. We were going. We didn't need him anymore. We let him go. Can you speak to that? Because I find that more often than not, and I don't quite understand what the problem is there, except that if I was going to be I don't know, a blacksmith or a football player, I don't know that I would fire my coach 6 months in.
So one thing I got to make sure that we're super clear on.
Yeah.
Scrum is an Agile methodology, but Agile is a philosophy of productivity.
Okay.
Yeah. So what we see more often than not is that people are trained on a methodology, but they're not trained on the philosophy that is underpinning it.
That makes it hard to adapt, I think.
It's hard to embrace the spirit of something if you're never trained.
Hmm.
So you're trained the method, but not the why. And without that, you have a disconnect for what you're actually trying to achieve. So people are told you got to punch this card, but they don't understand that the punching the card helps the HR people register that they're working there. It helps the finance people know how long they were working. It lets them get paid. And that's all part of the accountability process that the whole organization goes through. Right. They think it's some stupid task. Everybody knows I was here. Why can't you just pay me for it? Right. But there's reasons why this has to exist. In fact, in some cases, in this simple example, you punch in and you punch out so that people know that you're not being abused as a part-time employee, being forced to work too many hours, so that there's legal precedent that protects you and them, right? All these things exist for a reason. But if you're not told why, you think it's dumb.
You don't understand the importance.
Yeah.
And context.
Yeah.
Go back to context.
Yeah.
So firing your Agile coach 6 months in, saying that we're good at something as complex as human alignment and change, I feel like there's a certain measure of either unawareness or arrogance to say that. I'll give you an example. I'm going to pick out something just technical, which I think is actually easy compared to the people stuff we're talking about. I still have not mastered VI. I still find edge cases on the editing tool on the command line called VI, which has been around since the 70s. I still find use cases for it. It is 2025. I started using VI in 1996. And I am still discovering things about it that existed in 1996. These are not new features that were added to this 30 or 40-year-old product. And that is something as finite as a piece of editing software that runs on the command line. It doesn't even have any fancy features. I don't want to lionize or overestimate the kind of the complexity of the human piece. I think there's certain aspects that are simple, but the throwing away of the coach and not understanding that there's a certain level of just continuous mastery that changes the minute you change one person in the environment. I think somewhere like people are like Agile is dead. Well, that's because humanity is tough to deal with. People are tough to deal with. And you get 1, 2, 3, 4 individuals in there, and the permutations just shift like crazy. And so I've never understood this kind of facet, which is probably why I'm more in the engineering side and not as much in the people side, but forced to get into the people side because it's affected the engineering side, right? And, so when people say, oh, Agile is dead, and we fired our coaches, and we don't have a methodology to replace it with, and we don't really know what to do next, but we agree in principle with the idea of delivering value in alignment with outcomes and having small iterative loops that allow us to get feedback. And like somewhere it's like, well, then what do you do now?
Yeah.
If you're not going to use Agile and you're not going to use Waterfall and the hybrids don't really work, like, what are you going to do?
I think part of the problem comes with what Louis said, is that people learned a methodology. And when that methodology does not work for them or does not work in the way that they want it to, they just throw it away. My memory is probably crap, and I'm probably wrong in saying this, but when I first started hearing about Scrum, all the rituals, they were like, we do this because of this. And there was always this added thing of, if it doesn't work for you, change it. Because that's what Agile is about, is finding what works for your team, finding what works for your company. And at some point that got lost, and everybody was like, nope, we have to follow the methodology exactly as it's.
It was scalability that made that change. Because when you have teams that are operating under their own rules that they've created, and you're trying to create alignment across multiple teams to create measurable results, sometimes the impetus or the desire was to standardize. And so by implementing standardization into these scaling methodologies, it removed some of the decide your own way of working.
Don't put me in the box. Don't put baby in the corner.
But even without that, even back in the old days, there were teams that would decide to do things that were unhealthy for them.
Oh, sure.
And so without a coach who can recognize and see the anti-patterns and help them find a different path, they're going to make choices that could potentially be bad for them and bad for the organization.
Because we do it as people.
Yeah,
we do
exactly.
It as humans.
And what is
all the time?
What is the natural way that people, when they encounter a problem, most people don't blame themselves for the choices that they've made.
No.
They're going to blame some external thing that they think that is impeding their ability to deliver.
Right.
So it's very natural if the whole team gets frustrated with, we're in too many meetings, we don't know what's going on, instead of saying, well, why are we in so many meetings? Let's change how many meetings we're in. Who's telling us that we have to be in these meetings? Let's just change the meetings, because the goal is really to do this. But instead of having that conversation, they say, Scrum is stupid. It doesn't work. Screw this. I'm not filling out those Kanban tickets or those tickets in whatever application that they're using. I'm not going to talk to the DevOps people because they don't know what they're talking about. I'm just going to put my headphones on, sit at my desk, and write code and leave at 5 o'clock.
Okay, so let's stay with that for a second.
Wait, I'm going to put my headphones on and do something else.
Okay, let's stay with that for a second. You put your headphones on, okay? As long as you code like Baby Driver, I'm game. So I will say this, is that, Louis, this is something that's come up again. And again, oddly enough, we're back in the circle around communication and context. We're back in that circle. What is the deal? Because even like the jokes around like the old style sysadmins, for example, from like the 90s, who, by the way, were originally developers and then evolved as a separate role. So just to be upfront, right? They were all C programmers, right, who had admin roles, and it all evolved out. Even they were messing with their coffee makers, and kind of like there was this kind of mythology around like, well, I'm just trying to avoid as much work as possible. But what was interesting is that embrasure of lazy, of that concept of wanting to avoid repetitive, boring work, basically enhanced automation, and in many ways enhanced customer self-service, because they were constantly seeking ways to take themselves out of the loop, right? What's interesting now is that we're not seeing that kind of, I almost wish that we would go back to being like, oh, I just want to be super lazy. I want the entire CI/CD pipeline to be like super intelligent, test all the things, do the scale, do performance. And what was interesting is that when you see back in the 90s and the 2000s, people were hammering at their craft because they wanted to do more interesting work and not less interesting work. And so they were constantly trying to automate that off. What's interesting now is that it seems like there's a lessening of like, I don't want to engage, I don't want to interact. And it might be a result of COVID. Like, I don't want to diminish anybody's suffering and pain around that. But it seems more and more we're creating distance with each other around collaboration and centering and figuring out what the other needs are. And like Agile is just, when we say like Agile is dead, it seems like this conversation of like, we don't want to collaborate with anyone anymore. We just want to, like you said, put our headphones on, go to work. But what is the use of making products that don't either increase relationship, reputation, revenue? What is the use of making products that just live in a vacuum?
So in the early 2000s, when Waterfall was falling away and Scrum and Kanban and XP was being adopted and the Agile Manifesto was being created, I think those people who were engaged in that were experimenting and willing to look at development of product as a team sport. I think that now we're in a space where this is being pushed on people, and those people are going to work only because it's their job. It's not because of a love of what they're doing or a love of the product that they're building or a connection with the customer or a connection even with the business that they're working for. And so when you push something on somebody and they have no connection, they're not going to foster one on their own.
Right.
So this comes back to, this is not about Agile or Scrum or Waterfall or anything of the sort. This is about the culture inside your organization that is fostered and created primarily by the leadership of your organization.
I mean, when we were doing the coding conversation the other day, there was a statement that was made that even like product owners or like CTOs could benefit from at least understanding the philosophy and the principles around software development. And even product owners could benefit even from being able to do a little bit, especially as we get low code, no code kind of situations that are, guardrail and quality. And so it was interesting because imagine I've worked for a CTO. Actually, I've been the CTO, but I've worked for CTOs who could code. And those guys run different. When you go to them with a problem, they don't grok the whole thing. They don't understand the whole thing out of the boat, but they understand just enough to be able to grasp the rest of it really quickly. And so to your point, it's like kind of a totally different situation where it's like there's a linkage there. So what you're saying is that this isn't a problem around the framework, and it's the principles that we're now embracing. That's the challenge. The culture we're now creating is the biggest problem.
Because the culture of isolation that we've talked about, the culture of we're in too many meetings, the culture of, well, we have to deliver this, so we're going to work 60, 80-hour weeks to get it done.
Which, by the way, the whole 996 thing that's arising.
The culture of, this isn't my problem, this is your problem.
Mm-hmm.
The culture of being a team that says no because we're too overloaded, right? Instead of figuring out how to make it work or actually having a real discussion about why it's important to prioritize it properly. Like, all of these things aren't being had because we've taken the command and control days of Waterfall.
Right.
We've moved into the more hopeful, more collaborative Agile space.
Right.
And then as we tried to scale up and bigger companies adopted Agile,
right,
that command and control seeped back in.
Yep.
And so now we're having stand-up meetings, but we're back actually in short bursts of Waterfall. And that's all we're doing, right? So is Agile dead? No, it isn't. But are people actually practicing it? Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not.
Especially, I think also, I think there are societal things in the United States where there's this increased lionization of individualization, the building of castles and moats, right? And the fostering of an individual's independence, that being priority.
Yeah.
Like
over everything.
Like, we must live in castles. We must act like kings. We must have unbelievable full agency to say, do, believe, and execute whatever we want. And the less that we can interact with people, the better. But I'll give you an example of something. I occasionally have groceries delivered. And when they come, I'm like out there saying hi, And they're always kind of like, and then eventually like the same people have shown up over the last like years. And so now they know, like, I'm going to say, hi, we're going to talk. How's it going? And then they're going to say, hey, by the way, I had to substitute one of your things. And on the app, I have a thing that tells me they substituted it.
Yeah.
But then the next time that person comes up and they're like, hey, I've got an order for 875, blah, blah, blah. They now know that, like, for the most part, I'll tell you if I need something, but otherwise, I love substitutions. I love surprises. Bring me like the thing I can't eat that I'm probably lactose intolerant for. That's like the new vanilla thing, and I'll just give it to Liam. He'll eat it. But like, I love that you got the thing, right? All from this human interaction. But the initial response from any new person who comes to deliver my grocery, like, oh my God, is this guy going to hurt me? Like, because we're so used to not talking to each other. And the only time, and I asked one of them, I said, why, we've been each other for a while now. They said, because the only interaction I get is negative.
Yep.
Like, I left the UPS guy, Christmas cookies one time, and he was like, I wasn't sure if these were for me. And it had a sign that said, for you, UPS guy, right? And it was like, because the only interactions I had were people are going to yell at me. And so it's interesting, there's this, it seems like, and I know that like we can't solve this, but it seems there's this societal underpinning that's supporting the professional evolution of like isolation, not talking, autonomy at all costs, individualization at all costs, convenience at all costs somewhere.
But how much autonomy do you have if you're afraid to interact with anybody?
Seriously.
Right? Like if fear is the primary motivator of all of your actions,
But we see this at work. Please continue. Sorry.
if fear is the primary motivator for everything, then you don't have any autonomy. You don't have any freedom. You're trapped in a cage. You're not able to
Wait,
actually see.
are you saying the story is more important than the reality in this case?
Yeah.
That we seem to be embracing the story of these benefits
Yeah.
and not the reality of its
Yeah.
actual implementation.
Yeah, because this has been proven through all of history. It's not just about software. We, as people, succeed and flourish with better prosperity if we work together than if we're by ourselves. And that is true. I think that's part of that whole Agile movement, finding ways to bring people together to communicate. The people portion is more important than any of the technology part. It's in the Agile manifesto.
Yes.
So without people, we can't succeed. We have to bring the people together. And if you're not willing to engage with other people, to solve problems, to deliver better value, to wow your customer, to move things forward, to make change happen, to learn and go beyond even what you thought you could do today, make tomorrow better, then I think that fundamentally has to change.
God, mic drop right there. I have nothing to add to that. I think you summed the whole thing up.
Yep.
Chris?
I totally agree.
I think that's absolutely correct. Here,
All right.
Louis. Let me know when you're running for office. Okay. So I think we've answered the question. One is you answered this thing. Is Agile dead? Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, it's continuously evolving. Are people using it correctly?
No,
Obviously not, right? Is there something else to even replace it? Well, when we're talking about the difference between collaboration and kind of like a fixed outcome perspective, I don't think there is anything to replace that.
Yeah.
I think we're talking about the philosophy.
I think that my fear is where this is going is developers are working in their cubicles or in their homes or in some place without any communication or connection to anyone. I'm seeing like Brazil, the movie Brazil. They're getting a printout that comes out of the wall next to them, which tells them what thing they need to do next. And they work on that thing. And if they don't do it fast enough, then they receive electric shocks through their chair. Yeah. And that's the future that we're headed for. And is that the autonomy and the isolation that you want? No, I don't think it is.
Aren't we already there? The electric shocks now are just lack of promotions.
Yeah.
And not, right. Getting all the
That's
stuff.
Or AI taking your job.
Yeah.
$5.
$5.
All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you so much for that conversation. Absolutely fabulous. And like 3 other topics in. So thank you. All right. We'll see you next time. Thanks.